Welcome back to the Efed podcast, the podcast exploring our fantasy wrestling hobby, where the wrestling is written, but the characters are real. I'm your host, Mikey Unlikely, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the Atomic Dropcast Network. We're back for another episode. What is going on out there in Efed world? How is everyone doing? Really enjoyed this week's Royal Rumble. Really liked what they did with Brock Lesnar, myself, and then enjoyed definitely the finish. If you haven't checked it out yet, check that one out. Men's and Women's Rumble, both great matches this year. Guys, what else is going out there? Let me know about your big news, your big results, your big signings, the openings, your closings, so on and so forth. I know, unfortunately, recently Mile High Wrestling closed its doors. We see it all the time, but it really hurts a little more when it's a good group of people. We know the Lee Best Invitational is coming up with High Octane Wrestling, the annual tournament, HowWrestling.com, that's HO Wrestling.com. They got that coming up. We're going to do a special episode of the Efed podcast this week with them. So check that out when we drop that. Otherwise, if you guys are digging the show, go ahead and subscribe on whatever platform you're using to listen. We would greatly appreciate it. If you want to interact with us, you can find us on Twitter at the Efed Podcast. We've got a Discord server you can be a part of. We're open to hearing from you. Please get at us with any ideas, suggestions if you want to advertise your Fed, or if you want to be interviewed here on the Efed Podcast. This week on the show, we've got the Efed Question of the Week, brought to you by the EWC. We've got another great interview this week with the handler behind Robb Daniels and Mainstream Wrestling. And we've got the frequently asked questions of the Efed podcast. So stay tuned for that. Before we get to the show, let's hear a word from our sponsors.
Defiance, an angle fed boasting 8 years of continuous fantasy wrestling. Defiance offers opportunities for original characters, micros, a standalone website utilizing Backstage 3 script, and a forum hosted on the long-running fwrestling.com, as well as a roster full of some of the most experienced writers in the game. Come see for yourself at defiancewrestling.com. That's defiancewrestling.com.
Do you miss when things had a little more attitude? Check out the Atomic Dropcast today. Mikey and Brian go back to the dawn of the Attitude Era, 1997, what we watched when we were kids. Now with a drink in our hand, having a good time, laughing with our friends, we go back, we rewatch the wrestling and the angles of yesteryear through a new set of eyes as adults. Check us out at atomicdropcast.com or check us out on YouTube, where we're dropping one episode every week for the next 30 weeks. Atomic Dropcast. Check us out today. All right, it's time for the Efed Question of the Week, brought to you by the EWC. The Extreme Wrestling Corporation is the game's longest-running roleplay Efed, having been established in 1997. With over 100 active roleplayers across 4 unique brands, the EWC offers opt-in booking on all of its bi-weekly shows. Home to Stranglemania and the 4-day wrestling festival known as WrestleFest, the EWC is built upon its welcoming community with zero bias and no drama. All styles are welcome. Come check out the EWC today at EWC4life.com. That's EWC, the number 4, life.com. This week's Efed Question of the Week is, name one thing that's outdated in Efeds, or name another thing that's on the way up. At Whirlwind Wrestling's head booker said, outdated. Fucking authority figure angles. It's not 1998 anymore, people. And on the rise, studio wrestling. Other small but intimate environments. I like that answer. Myself, it would be interested in a small studio wrestling thing, similar to the NWA. I've been digging the NWA Power episodes on YouTube. Check them out if you haven't. NWA Power. Also, I'm a little behind on their shows, so I got to check out the pay-per-view. It just happened. Hard Times, I think it's called. So, yeah, definitely the studio wrestling is on its way up. At XWF_Fuzz, Feds with RP limits of anything above 3. All Feds used to have a 4 RP limit for major titles, and that's long gone now with the obvious integration of quality over quantity. Totally agreed, Fuzz, and rightfully so. I think it definitely should come down to quality over quantity. Anybody can sit there and type 30,000 words of garbage. At Rick Tweedless. Characters who are completely fearless no matter the circumstance, which leads into my second point, not selling your role in a match. Almost every match has a face and a heel, although they may not actually be a face and a heel. The match needs one of each to tell a story. I definitely see where you're coming from. Too many gray areas. We have too many tweeners and cool heels. Stop being cool, guys. I'm the only one doing it right. Just kidding. At Chris Brock, EWC. Characters totally based on real life wrestlers. Either they're pick base or a gimmick. I've been in this game a long time, and it's time to make things 100% original. There's so much you can do when you take little bits from many things and give it your own twist. Definitely. We're seeing a lot of people who are taking the pick base and trying to be that person again. They're changing the name, but they're putting the same personality behind it. At Bad Girl Inc. Back in the day, platforms like Angel Fire were used extensively. Now almost all Efeds use message boards or forums. Very true. I think a lot of people use their forums to post their role plays. A lot of other ones use their own websites to post them. So any way you want to do it, that's cool. I definitely think that people have stopped using the old Angel Fire or GeoCities platforms where they built a website specifically for their role plays. That's a bit much. I'm going to do it tomorrow. At CrossRakoba. Say it with me, promo layouts right on the spot. Nailed it. We were just talking about that, Cross. How did you know? Are you listening? At Risky Agogo. On the way down is creativity. Burn. On the way up, literal carbon copies of the pick base. Yes, just touched on that. Totally agree. Be original, people. At TEH_CM. Kinda goes with CrossRakoba's picks and RP boasts, but also banners and graphics of your character at the top of your RP seems to be out of date. Very much so, unless you have PSDs of micros or posers, or there's so many different versions of pick bases these days. Yeah, people have stopped doing the websites built for them. They've stopped doing the banners, which I seem to appreciate a little bit more. At Joe the Boss CWF, stratting. Very few handlers know how to strat. I will ask them what moves they wish to do, and some will send a YouTube link, but rarely do you see handlers who strat their matches. Definitely, I remember doing that early on in my Efed career when it was a much bigger deal, where you would kind of come up with a outline of the match you wanted to have, and not just say, hey, my character sometimes does a DDT. At 6, SIXX, numbers 66, APW, that's confusing, down, reply promos, and on the way up, micro role plays in Efeds. Definitely, I think the micro fed is on the way up as people don't have the time sometimes to write the 3,000, 4,000 word role plays. So hey, you can stay in the game while somewhat taking a break and still hit out 500-600 words a week. I like the idea of that. Very good, everyone. Thank you for answering this week's question of the week, brought to you by the EWC. That's EWC, the number 4, life.com. All right, guys, welcome back to the Efed podcast here on the Atomic Dropcast Network. Today we're joined by Robb, the handler of Robb Daniels, the fedhead of mainstream wrestling. Robb, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
We appreciate you coming on. How are you doing?
Doing very well, and you?
I'm doing very well also. Glad you could make it on. I don't know what you remember, but actually we interacted with each other some time ago, a couple years back, in Skyfire Wrestling. I joined there for a hot minute before Jay went back to the UWL.
I do remember those times.
Yeah, it was a good fed, so I was into it. That was my break back into Efedding after my long break, so it was cool to run into you. Go ahead.
I think I remember you telling me that, because we did have some interaction at the time, but that was kind of like my limbo area of my Efed career.
Okay. You were just hopping in and out?
Well, actually, I've been playing the game since 2003, which is not as long as many others, but I know Jay personally. We're actually very good friends. We live within minutes of each other. We actually started the game together. In all honesty, we started role playing around the same time, and he went off into the fedhead role, and I continued to write competitively. But it took a long time for me to actually go out on a limb and become a fedhead. But
we'll get there in the interview. We're going to kind of ease into it a little bit in that regard.
Okay.
But let's start with how you got into wrestling in the first place.
Just wrestling in general?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've just always been a fan since my childhood. My father and grandfather, actually my grandmother as well, they were all fans. I remember watching WCW Saturday night, just different things, Nitro, the Attitude Era. I mean, it was just, I was at first a WCW fan.
Okay.
You know what I mean? In general, my original favorite was Sting.
Okay.
Which I think many people who was a fan of WCW. And I found WWF later on. But, I was a fan of the Monday Night Wars. I slowly went over to WWF. As I got older, I couldn't watch it as much. But here recently, I just don't have the time to watch it.
Right.
But I do have time to play the game, and Twitter is a huge access for me to be able to see what's going on, what the know is, what has happened, and to just follow the sport.
Right. Yeah, it's a great window into the sport. It's also the highs and the lows are all on Twitter.
Oh, yes.
Well, very good. And so you said Sting was one of your favorites, obviously, as a kid, but who else were your favorites growing up and throughout?
Well, once I got older, there's YouTube and the tape trading and whatnot, I have a great appreciation for Ric Flair, the Four Horsemen. I can't say enough about him. And, in my teenage years, I grew up, in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I was a huge Rock fan.
Okay.
I thought he was hilarious. Such a good promo. I really enjoyed his work. I didn't appreciate Stone Cold at the time because I was such a Rock fan, but now I do. I'm just a huge fan of the sport in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a big Rock fan as well. He was every Monday night. You knew you were in for some entertaining shit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, how did you find e-wrestling then?
I don't know how you would exactly say that. I think I more so stumbled upon it because, I was reading the dirt sheets back in the day. I was probably a sophomore in high school. Just looking online, found this strange website of some people I'd never heard of. And then I realized that wasn't exactly who they were. It was posers / pick bases of people, other famous people. And they had different names and different, height and weight. And then I read more into it and read this is more so like fantasy football or something. And it seems like before, it was during the summer of 2003. And those were some late summer nights online. You didn't have to go to bed, to get ready for school the next day. So it seemed like I filled out an application for a character, and I sent it by email.
Mm-hmm.
That's how long ago it's been. And the next day, I told Jay Jefferson about it, and he signed up as well after I kind of told him how to get to that.
Okay.
And the rest is just, it's the rest is history.
Yeah, that's right. So talk to us about your character history. Did you start as Robb Daniels?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Actually, I was such a copycat of The Rock. He was actually the Robb.
The Robb.
Just
There you go.
Just the Robb. And I had a character on, I think it was SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, I think it was. I had to create a wrestler, and his name was the Robb on there. he had just your basic likeness to, just an average athletic white male with kind of the Road Warrior Sting face paint, but it was blue and black with the Chris Benoit tights, but with the blue and the black. And that somehow I think I took a picture of the face and the body, and that's kind of how we started out. Jay did the same thing, and for a little while that's how that went until, after about 6 months I realized I'm totally ripping off The Rock, but with just a different look.
Absolutely. I think everybody in the beginning, you lean on what you know, and that all you know is what you see on TV.
Right.
So after The Robb, what came next?
Well, I live in Eastern Kentucky.
Okay.
That's not a big secret to a lot of the people who's close to me. I'm a huge University of Kentucky Wildcats basketball fan.
There you go.
And during those years, 2002, 2003, there was a player who played for them, and his name was Eric Daniels. Now, he's by far not he's not a Hall of Famer. He's not going to go down in history as one of the greatest players. But when I was trying to figure out what kind of last name am I going to pair with Robb, Daniels just kind of rolled off the tongue just perfect. It was seamless. So I adopted that name, and I think I changed the pick base to like Randy Orton at the time or something like that. No, it couldn't have been Randy Orton. I've jumped too far ahead. It seems like it might have been, it could have still been The Rock or something. I really don't know, because pick bases back then wasn't as big as they are now.
Right. Yeah, when it started, usually you just picked regular wrestlers, and then celebrities kind of came later, I noticed.
Right.
Yeah. So Robb Daniels was born, and what were the big feds you were in once you really got into it? I know it's hard to remember the first feds you're in. It's hard to remember those developmental things where you're finding out how to play the game. But hit us with like the big feds Robb Daniels would play in.
Okay. The first 2 or 3 feds that I was in was not open very long. Short year, similar people, same fed heads. There was a guy by the name of James. He was from the UK, and he had a fed called FWEN. I don't even remember the actual breakdown of that name, but that was my first fed. He also went on to open a fed called More Power Wrestling. It was MPW, and that was probably my first dive into like a huge out-of-character community. There were a lot of people from the United Kingdom who were in this fed, along with just a few people that we knew at the time personally. Those kind of fell off the map. Me and Jay, we kept pushing through. I had I was a part of a tag team with Jay Jefferson early on, and then they started having us feud against each other. Jay seems like he always came out on top as the world heavyweight champion. No matter where we were, I don't know what it was. He always came out on top. But it was fun. But at the time, looking back, it was so poorly run that it makes me. I've learned from every other person's mistakes.
Yep.
And how they've done well on how to run mainstream wrestling.
That makes sense.
From late results to inconsistent booking, favoritism, things like that, leaving holes in stories. I learned all that early on, and I think that it was so rough for so long on just consistency in one fed that Jay went off to become the fedhead for a couple feds before UWL,
Okay.
but that's where I landed in. I think it was like 2005. Well, in all honesty, I never had the drive to be a Fed head back then. I just wanted to I wanted to push through and get away and find somewhere I could just consistently write and, express my fantasy, my booking in my head. I wanted to push the Robb Daniels character to be better. And I knew that if I could get a place that was fair, that could judge based on the actual quality of the writing, that I would do well. And I landed in Jace Fed.
Now, landing in Efed, do you think there was any favoritism there?
Absolutely not. Let me tell you something. Just because I know him, it does not mean I got any favoritism, because he was probably the hardest Fedhead that I wrote under. But what kept me there was the quality of the writers around me.
That makes sense. So, talk to us about the best rivalries that Robb Daniels has had.
The best?
Yep.
There's guys by the name of Robbie Venom, Sean Stevens. You're looking at Jerry McLean. Robb Daniels was a member of the War Machines back in UWL. That was around late 2009, 2010. It was a group of guys that I just kind of was like, hey, I think you guys got something good here. I've got an idea in mind. You're more than just a singles wrestler and a tag team. Let's build a faction. I went with that. And we went through there for a little while. But then in like 2011, we hit bumps and they left the Fed. And we started seeing politics a little bit between certain guys who were upset about losing, and they didn't like the unfavorable outcome. And I went back to singles run. I even left UWL, I think, in 2011.
Okay. Well, so talk to us about what are the biggest accomplishments that Robb Daniels had?
2013 is probably my best year as an active weekly role player, because going back and touching base with the War Machine demise, I went out on my own, and I decided, okay, I like the idea of having quality writers around me to write together. So I decided to pair up with some other guys. Some of their names is Justin Brooks, Jacob Davies, and Angelo Valor. We were known as Mainstream. That was our faction name. In 2013, we started off the year in the main event, even though we were a faction. In March of that year, it was all four of us in the main event of the Honor and Glory, which was the show, the main supercard for the entire year for UWL.
Okay.
And the four of us, we had our match. We had a 3 RP limit with no word limit, okay? And I wrote 2 role plays, posted the second one on the day of the month. I stayed, I'm telling you, man, it's crazy. That Friday night, I stayed home, and I wrote that 3rd role play, and I busted it out, and I was so proud of it. And then I posted. Jay was very timely with his results. I waited up until like 2 a.m. waiting for him to post the show. I had a couple of the guys come to me and say, are you staying up for the show? And I said, yeah, I am. I'm excited to see the outcome. I think I've got a chance. And they said, you shouldn't be so excited. You posted 2 within the 6-hour window. I waited too long to post my 3rd role play. It disqualified me from actually winning. Jay actually went on to tell me that if all 3 role plays would have counted, I would have won. And that would have been my first UWL World Championship. But it wasn't meant to be, because when I lost, I stepped away for a couple months. I took some time to come up with this idea. and it was going to be like a redemption tour. Mainstream had fell apart. We never did come back together. We were so competitive that it was hard to work together after that, in character and out of character. We were just so competitive, and there were just so many quality role players there at the time. Everybody wanted to win and do well. So when I came back, UWL had their historic 16-man tournament called the Coronation Cup. There's 4 blocks, A, B, C, and D, with 4 people in each block. And you do a round-robin tournament until you have your winners of each block. And then they have a super card where those 2 face off against each other, and then they have the finals that night.
Okay.
Later on in the main event. And I'm thinking it was in about September 2013. Man, I just tore through everybody. I beat Jacob Davis in the first round. He just absolutely, I come back with this idea of I'm going to just get redemption on everybody. And at the time, I stole an idea from the TV show Dexter. And I had this graphic, and it was a book that was opened up. And on the graphic, it said the Daniels Manifesto. And in each role play that I would write, I would just dive into what that person had done to me in the time that I knew them, and I would just cut a promo. And they were golden. I mean, they were golden. If I knew that if I didn't win, it was because Jay didn't like me. Because each time that I role played, I knew I was going to be who I was. That was the most inspiring. And I actually won the Coronation Cup. 1 month later, I faced a guy by the name of Frankie Cochise. Frankie is not very competitive in the game anymore, but he was also in a Fed that was run by, have you heard of Explode? He's in EWC.
Yeah.
Explode is actually who I beat in the finals of the Coronation Cup that year. And Frankie came from a Fed that he ran, I think it was called XPW, something like that. But Frankie was someone who done Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. But he come over, he was a wrestling fan, and when he found Efed, he was just awesome at it. But I guess I could also add him into one of my memorable feuds. But yeah, when I won the World Heavyweight Championship in 2013, it was just the culmination of like 10 years. You know, I had already been in like 5 at the time, 5 years, and been role playing for 10 years. It just, at that time, that was the most meaningful victory that I'd had.
That's a great story. So, talk to us about the formation of Mainstream and how it evolved from the former Portland promotion.
Okay. People don't really know exactly how it happened. I'm not really told anybody, so this is pretty well an exclusive, okay?
Very good.
During the year of 2014, my wife and I got married, and I had made all the preparations earlier in that year to retire the character and to leave the game. Because in all honesty, my wife does not know that I still play this game. I've played this game since 2003, and she doesn't even realize in the last 12 years that I'm able to be competitive in another angle fed and run my own angle fed. So it's pretty impressive if you think about it. I mean, I've had a lot of people think that's crazy, but, you know, some people just don't understand how you spend your time, and I'm afraid she just wouldn't understand. So, but the formation of Mainstream and the, you know, going back to the Seattle Pro in 2015, you know, following about 8 months that I didn't fed at all, didn't even keep up with the game. I had a really good friend who was very dominant, very, very dominant in UWL, and his name was Caleb Hart. He's a good friend of mine. He lives in Maryland. We've talked several times on Skype. I've been very close to him. He's a very good person. He's a very good writer. But, man, he's just such a guy. so hard to beat. It's very hard to beat in a role play battle. And the thing is you can write a novel, and his 1,000 words will beat your novel because he's so spot on. He got a lot of hate from some of the guys that had been in UWL for a while. He was unbeatable. A lot of people lost their want to play the game because he was so good. So there was some people who was sending anonymous PMs and emails and messages to Jay, to myself, to Caleb, all the people, that was involved, talking about how Caleb Hart was such a bad person and a bad influence on the game, and how they were going to leave if he didn't leave. And eventually Caleb stepped down. Well, I decided I wanted to come back in the game after I disappeared. I log on the UWL board, and I've got all these PMs from people that's anonymous telling me about, how it's not fair, how things are, and I'm not even there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I decided to get back in the game, I'm like, I'm just going to do something different. I'm going to be somebody else other than Robb Daniels. And I'm not going to tell anybody who I am. That way I can play the game and enjoy it. So I created Blake Mitchell. Blake Mitchell has a pick base of Finn Balor. He's been active for about nearly 5 years now. It's nothing really to write home about. I don't think I've ever won a championship with him. I competed in UWL with him just very briefly. Moved on to a Fed called Lions Road.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Another good friend. His name's Kevin. He's a huge influence in my fedhead. In all my all the ways that I book and whatnot. Him and Jay was. I took Blake Mitchell there, and I started riding with him, and then I got a DM from him, Kevin, and Kevin didn't know I was Blake Mitchell. And he said, "Hey, Rob, why don't you sign up for Lions Road with Daniels and compete in the first tournament?" I said, "Sure, I'll do it." Well, then I hear I've got 2 characters in that Fed. And here I'm becoming one of the things that I hate now. I hate how everybody has so many multiple characters and you never know who is who. You know what I mean?
People play they try to pretend they're not the person they are, the handler.
Right.
Yeah.
And here I'm doing the same thing, So I'm on completely different sides of the bracket with these characters. Kevin doesn't even know at the time. I post my first role play with Blake Mitchell. It's a very good role play. Go to my second role play with Daniels. What did I do? I forgot to log out of the Blake Mitchell account on the board. Posted under the Blake Mitchell account. Kevin seen it within minutes. I had deleted it to go repost it. He messaged me. He wasn't upset. He was surprised. And then he told me, he said, "Which one do you want to go forward with?" And I picked Daniels. So Blake Mitchell was written off then. Daniels went on to win that tournament. And he was the first King of Lions champion in 2016, that is, since the Fed was opened 5-6 years before that. So that was my re-entry into the game in 2016.
So how did mainstream wrestling come to be?
Okay. Sorry, I shied from that question. Blake Mitchell, just to give him some background, all that information, and a little bit of history, I made him from Seattle. I made his local promotion that he came from, Seattle Pro Wrestling in Seattle. It was actually not Portland, it's Seattle. And and after I left Lions Road in like November of 2016, I decided, now I like angle feds. That was my first taste of an angle fed, was in the spring summer of 2016. And I really enjoyed it. I thought I could handle this. I could do this. So I decided to step away from the game for about a month. And I just went head first into the idea of Seattle Pro Wrestling. I shied away from Blake Mitchell. I made a board. I made a Twitter account. Got some graphics made. Then I held my first event on 2016 at Seattle Pro Wrestling.
And so you ran that Fed until it converted to mainstream?
In all honesty, it's just a name change. We never stopped. We never had any breaks. Never paused.
Okay.
It was just a complete rebrand.
Okay.
This past summer, I decided that we've been going for almost 3 years at the time when I decided to do the rebrand. I said, we're outside of Seattle. We're traveling to different cities. We're having shows different places outside of the country. We're not this territorial Fed anymore. So that at the time I decided to get some new graphics made. Our weekly, bi-weekly show was called Mainstream with the Roman numeral on it based on, which one it was. So we're just keep going with that and still Mainstream Wrestling. I had all new graphics, different color scheme drawn up. I had all the championship titles edited. I had Kevin from Lions Road. He went in and on the board, adjusted all the color schemes. He's really good at that. And we move forward.
That's great. And what are some of the bigger things that have happened in mainstream wrestling or Seattle Pro?
In all honesty, I never really wanted to leave applications just open to the public. I really wanted to recruit people that I enjoyed working with, that told good stories, and that's what I've done. You're more than welcome to post an application, but you may not be accepted. If you're one of those cookie cutter Instagram models, you probably won't get accepted. if all you're going to do is post bikini pictures on, that's just not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who can write a match, who can write a segment, who can help me piece these shows together. And when I say mainstream wrestling is a team effort, it truly is. I cannot take credit for each of these shows myself because there's a lot of us who work on separate matches, who submit segments, and I just piece it all together.
That's what a good fedhead does, is they allow the handlers to write the fed, and they just work with them to make sure it's presented the right way.
Right.
Very good. And why should people join mainstream wrestling if they are a good writer?
One of the things that when you join the Fed that's expected of you is based on whether it's a singles or a tag team match. One of the things we request is for you to submit anywhere from 5 offensive match sequences. Now, you're not going to hear this kind of, wordage at any other Fed other than maybe NVR Wrestling that's ran by Billy Danielson, who's also been on the podcast.
Yes,
An offensive match sequence is basically, the lead up to an execution of a move. And that is exactly how we piece our matches together. We let each individual handler write their own offensive sequences. We weave them together to complete the match. So if you're in the main event, you could have more sequences, requested. You could have less if you're in the opening match. In our tag team matches, what we do is in our sequences, I ask that nobody tags in and out of the matches in their sequences, and they allow me to do that. That way, it hits the flow of the match. Our matches in usually pretty good length. There's usually no filler, and our storylines, I think, are very well thought out because we almost have 10 segments every show. Everybody turns in some sort of a segment, and then there's always that surprise factor that I try to maintain by adding my own segments that nobody knows about.
right. And that's always fun, too, when you read something you didn't know was coming with your character in it.
I mean, it is an angle Fed, but in the beginning it was meant to be a Twitter-based Fed, and a lot of the role-playing does take place on Twitter. You do not have to have Twitter to do this. It's just seems easier for everyone to keep in contact because out-of-character boards are just so much like a thing of the past. It's very hard to keep people active on an out-of-character board. It seems to me. I've struggled with that. But with Twitter, DMs and things like that. We just shoot ideas to each other. I mean, I get DMs from people all the time pitching ideas. I may not always use your idea, but I'm very fair. You know, I do. I've been accused of being a little predictable sometimes, but I'm shying away from that. I'm actually having surprise title changes and some swerves, you know, that I throw in there. I don't think there's hardly anybody that could say anything bad about their time in mainstream wrestling. It's just we're a little bit different, but we do put the show together as a team, and we're pretty timely on things on our show postings.
Very good. And where can people find mainstream wrestling?
You can find us at mainstreamwrestling.com, and our Twitter handle is a little bit different. At mainstream was taken, and I don't feel like paying $1,000 for the handle, so it's at / capital V, then it's the /, and then it's AINSEREAM. But I do appreciate everybody who's had a hand in my Efed career and mainstream wrestling. I just like to thank my roster. In all honesty, I got some of the best guys and girls. That helps me write these shows. Monthly, bi-weekly, whatever we do. We don't have a set schedule. We just do what we need to do to tell a good story.
Sounds great. Check them out, mainstreamwrestling.com. All right, Rob, are you ready for the Twitter questions?
Sure.
At Hero High Spot, hit us with your thoughts on Silky Boy.
I'm sure we're talking about Mr. Silk, our former world heavyweight champion.
At Silky Smooth.
Yeah. Okay. He's a very good rider. He's a good friend. He carried the banner very strongly for mainstream wrestling as his time on top. He's a great person. He's easy to work with, and he's very, very confident in his work. I'll just say that.
It's a great way to put it. He also asked, who else would you like to see in mainstream?
There's a lot, but I'm going to be honest with you. If I had to throw one name out, I got to get Hammerstein back. I got to get Weems at Jacob Hammerstein. He's a former world heavyweight champion in mainstream wrestling back when it was Seattle Pro. He left last January. And in other feds, there's no heat. There's no nothing between us. He just went off to do something different. But I've got everybody I need, and if I could have one person back, it'd be Jacob Hammerstein.
At 1% INC, Chris Constantine Jr. asks, why do you hate me?
He's a son of a bitch, and that's why I hate him.
Gotta love questions like that. At Dick Tweedless, this is the Batista's Dick question of the Efed podcast. Is your mom hot?
Oh my goodness, probably at some point, but not right now.
And the next question from him is she single?
No.
No, not single. Sorry, Ridiculous. So his real question, he always asks that and follows it up with a good one. As a handler, how do you deal with an opponent who doesn't like to sell? Everyone's character seems to be completely unshakable these days, tough as nails, fearless regardless of their role in the match. So how do you as a handler deal with someone whose character doesn't want to sell, either in an angle fed or in a roleplay fed?
Well, in all honesty, there's not much you can do about it. I mean, I've been having to do this for over 15 years with people in competitive role playing. You can only do so much. You just have to write your best role play. You have to sell your character the best. You can't really worry about what they have to say because, everybody's a tweener these days. It's very rare that you're going to find an actual face. It's so hard to be a quality face. It's very easy to be a hateable heel, but everybody wants to be that cool guy, that cool bad guy that everybody, everybody loves to hate.
Absolutely. Up next, we got at Danielson_goat. He's got 3 questions. Number 1, why the hell do you keep pushing Billy Danielson?
I don't push Billy Danielson. He just does so well that he earns his spots, and that's just me. Billy Danielson I know he's a former guest on the show. I met him in UWL probably in 2014. He beat me straight up in a role play battle the first time I ever met him. And that little jerk, I've watched him grow up and become such a good role player. He took MVR wrestling off my hands and has done magnificent things with it. I'm very proud of him.
That's great. So number 2 is, how does it feel knowing Billy Danielson beats you competitively, even though he sucks at role playing?
He doesn't suck, because I know that, I thought it was a quality role play when I wrote mine. I wasn't confident with it, but I knew that his was very good. He can't say that he sucks at role playing. It's just the way that the game is now. People just enjoy angled feds more. I don't know what it is. Role playing feds seem like the thing of the past, but I do appreciate the ones that are still around.
His 3rd question is, was it a hard decision to take Seattle Pro from the original owner?
No, because in all honesty, it was all fictional anyways. I made it up. The previous owners are all fictional. It's just part of a backstory for Blake Mitchell, and I just kind of took that and made Blake Mitchell a advancement character that he was a respectable guy that if you beat, it meant something. Nowadays, it's very hard to make it appear to be a meaningful victory over him, but I've always been selfless. I've had several side characters that I've used to push people over the hump, but no, Seattle Pro was just so easy and seamless, and I just recruited a bunch of people that in the beginning that I thought would be good under the umbrella, and over time we've weeded through some of those. We've had new people be added. Some people come and go, and nobody's obligated to stay, but we've had a great group of people. It's been around a long time.
At Jason Cash has a couple of them as well. If you were on death row, what would be your last meal choice, drink included?
Chicken and dumplings with the biggest glass of Coke I could get.
His 2nd question is, why mainstream? What attracted you to become ownership of a promotion as well as an active handler?
I don't have the time to write a competitive role play. In my later years of actual active role playing, I had a lot of situations with writer's block, focusing, actually sitting down trying to write a quality role play that I hadn't already written 10,000 times before. You can only say something so many times and it not become old news. And I had evolved the character so many times, I didn't have time to sit down and write a quality role play. But somehow I find out to help produce a quality wrestling show. Just guys like Jay Jefferson and Kevin from Lions Road, they're inspirations. They're the people that I lean on for advice. I see things that they do in their feds, and I kind of put my own spin on it in mine. As in a circle, we're a tripod of feds that we have a lot of the same guys who compete in our feds. We do completely different stories. It's just mainstream is just something I've really enjoyed. As of right now with my kids, I have the time to piece these shows together and post them. I could see myself doing this for another 10 years.
That's a great outlook to have. His bonus question is, do we get pets on insurance at mainstream wrestling?
He doesn't even have any insurance. He won't even take a shower.
A good one. All right, last question. At Queen Coral Rose asks, what is the best decision and the worst decision you've made with mainstream wrestling?
Okay. The worst decision that I've ever made, it might be a knock, but I've made some bad choices on who should she carried the titles at certain times, but probably my worst would be having Declan Black defeat James Edwards to become the second champion, because Declan was just such a hateable guy on Twitter that I thought he would just be an awesome heel. And James Edwards actually wrote the match where Declan Black defeated James Edwards. And you got to remember, this is like in March or April of 2017. He wrote a great match. James Edwards, I got to give nods to him. He was our first world heavyweight champion. He's a great handler, good guy to work with. He wrote a quality match between him and Declan Black. He made him look like a freaking superstar. But Declan just did not have the time to be in the game, really, and he just couldn't live up to the hype that I had for him. And that's not his fault. That's more so my fault. I shouldn't have done that. But maybe putting the title on. The best decision? The best decision was when I got rid of the women's championship and I started letting the men and the women and have intergender wrestling and championships. I limited, women from being able to compete for the main title for a short amount of time, about 6 months. But when I got rid of the women's title, that was probably the best thing I did.
That's a great outlook as well. I think intergender wrestling in e-fedding is growing. I think it's becoming common, and we shouldn't, unless you can promote a women's title to mean as much as your world title, which is very rare. Otherwise, you should just allow everybody to compete for one main championship.
Right.
So I definitely agree with that. All right, man. Anybody else you want to shout out to? Anything else you want to plug before we go?
Man, I'm just going to be honest with you. We got a lot of things coming up here in mainstream wrestling. Later this month, on the 26th, the same night of the Royal Rumble. It's not tomorrow, but next Sunday we've got our Pinnacle Battle Royal at our Conflict event. The Pinnacle Battle Royal is just like the Royal Rumble. It may be a ripoff, but a lot of people enjoy it. We have everybody come in at 2-minute intervals until there's one person standing. That person has an ironclad contract for a world title opportunity. The first year, Jacob Hammerstein won that in 2018, and 2019, Silky Smooth won it. Both of them had went on later on in that year to become the world heavyweight champion. So it's exciting to see some of the surprise entrants that will be in that match, and some of the people that's already there. Know the order that they come in. And, I've not told anybody ahead of time who's going to win, so it's going to be a huge surprise. And then also this summer, we've got our Emerald City Classic, which will be our fourth Emerald City Classic. We had Brian Blaze win in 2017. Eli Buchanan won in 2018. And Billy Danielson won in 2019. Each of them also went on to become world heavyweight champion, except for Billy, which he did lose his match in December at the 3-year anniversary show. But those are two of the things that I can say we're really looking forward to. Pinnacle Battle Royals next weekend. We've got our Emerald City Classic this summer, and let's just keep telling good stories, man.
By the time this airs, that Battle Royal will have ended, so definitely go check out the Battle Royal at mainstreamwrestling.com. All right, Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I really appreciate the acknowledgement.
All right, this week on the Efed podcast, we're going to try something a little bit different. This week, we're going to do the Efed podcast frequently asked questions. Question number 1, where can I listen to the Efed podcast? I'm pretty sure you already know the answer because you're listening right now. Search the Efed podcast. You'll find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, Android, YouTube, everything. efedpodcast.com. There's nowhere you won't find us. If there is, let me know, and I'll make it happen. Number 2, when does the next episode come out other than this one? Every new episode drops on Monday afternoon around 2 p.m. Sometimes I'm a little bit anxious and I tend to release them early. Number 3, can I be on the podcast as a guest on the interview? Absolutely yes. We're interested in having handlers, fedheads, staffers, whatever kind of fed you're in. That said, there currently is a wait list and we are booked into September of 2020. DM me, get added to the list, and we will hit you up when it is your turn. Number 4, how many people are involved in the Efed podcast? Mikey, Unlikely, myself. I am the show's host and producer and creator. Brian, he has been a giant help for getting the Efed podcast off the ground. So shout out to Brian. He is helping with server space, web design, graphics, and more. Check out at Savage Souls on Twitter to support Brian's music. Number 5, how do you do your podcast? I use a free MP3 Skype recorder to record interviews, and when I'm editing, I use Audacity to split the audio. Then I import everything into a pro edition of Mixcraft to mix everything together and export it to MP3 for your beautiful ears to listen to. And that is going to wrap us up for another edition of the Efed podcast here on the Atomic Dropcast Network. I'd like to send a special shout out to our sponsors, the Atomic Dropcast. You can find them at atomicdropcast.com. Those are some great guys, especially that Mikey guy. He's really awesome. Check out defiancewrestling.com. Great angle fed that's been around forever. We've been going for a long time. I've been there for years. Check us out at defiancewrestling.com. And of course, the EWC, the Extreme Wrestling Corporation. Check them out at EWC4life.com. As always, thank you for listening. Where the wrestling is written, but the characters are real.